Okay, so welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Greetings to everywhere in the world. We're so glad to have you with us here today, and welcome to this session as part of the AFS 2022 International Education Week webinar series. This session is on global competence in teacher education, resources for teaching and learning. The Global Competence in Teacher Education project works with teacher educators and trainee teachers worldwide to develop future cohorts of teachers who are both globally competent and have the skills to develop global competence in their students. During this webinar, we will share key project outputs, including the official launch of an eBook that presents a series of structured learning designs and associated resources for teaching and learning about global competence. Couple of features available to you before we get started through the Zoom webinar. You can activate closed captioning. I see that someone has already done so. Should that assist you in following along, please feel free to activate that. We encourage you all to share greetings. I see many of you have already done that in the chat. Feel free to share anything relevant to the discussion in the chat as well. You're also free to share questions in the chat. However, if it's a question that you feel like might take some more input and time from the panelists, we encourage you to use the Q&A feature as part of the webinar. There will be a designated time for Q&A, questions and answers at the end. We will try to get to as many of the questions as we can that time will allow for. The webinar is being recorded and it will be available on the AFS YouTube channel following the session. And finally, if you do take screenshots and you feel like sharing your impressions on social media, first of all, make sure that all of us look good in your screenshots. I have a nasty habit of being caught frozen with my face in a weird, distorted way. So make sure that looks good. But then also make sure that you're using the appropriate hashtag AFS effect, hashtag IEW 2022, and then mention @AFS. All right. I am your host today. I'm your moderator. My name is Dylan Peterson. I'm an education consultant for AFS Intercultural Programs, and I am based in Youngstown, Ohio in the United States. For AFS, one of my primary roles is coordinating the AFS Effect Plus for the Classroom program, which is a capacity building program for teachers around the world, aiming to equip them with global competence abilities and the capacity to bring that global competence education into their classrooms. I'm also a former teacher myself. I was a science teacher for a number of years in the state of Alaska here in the US, in Washington, DC, as well as in Maputo province in Mozambique. So this topic here today of global competence in teacher education is near and dear to me. And I'm very interested in the topic and just happy to be here with our panelists. So that's a little bit about me. If this is your first session this week, if you're not familiar with what this event series is, just a little background. International Education Week is an opportunity to celebrate the benefits of international education and exchange worldwide. AFS, we've organized a series of webinars on topics ranging from intercultural and global competence, pedagogy and assessment, virtual exchange, diversity, equity, inclusion, and international and teacher education, a wide range of topics. We welcome everybody here, professionals, enthusiasts, students. If you're retired, it's anybody and everybody is welcome. And if you're interested in learning more about the other sessions, you can do so at the link listed here, afs.org/IEW. I see my colleague Carol, who is supporting us with tech here today, has shared that link in the chat. Okay. So if you're unfamiliar with AFS, AFS is primarily an organization based on facilitating international exchange opportunities for high school students. Originally, it was founded as a volunteer ambulance program during World War I. Again, in World War II, following the Second World War, it changed and morphed and became an organization focused on exchange. And today, AFS has over 70 years of experience in intercultural programs. We have currently 55 AFS national organizations operating in 113 countries. About 12,000 student exchanges are facilitated by AFS every year, and we have about 500,000 alumni as part of our network. So welcome to any and all alumni of AFS exchange programs that are here. AFS has 3 key impact goals that guide all of our programs. First, we aim to develop active global citizens. We also strive to globalize schools and institutions. And thirdly, expand access to intercultural education. All 3 of these impact goals are a key focus for all of our programs. And all 3 of these impact goals are closely linked to the work being presented today through this project of global competence in teacher education. So we are really, really proud to be a part of this project. AFS is glad and thrilled to have the opportunity to work with the panelists here today in this project, because we know that the values that AFS has is represented here in this project. But that's enough introduction from my end. We'd actually like to learn from all of you in attendance right now, so that the panelists can know a little bit more about who is attending today, where are you connecting from, what's a little bit of your background related to the topic. And so to do so, we would like for you to join a Menti. If you're unfamiliar with this, there are 3 ways you can join. First, the easiest is if you have a smart device with a camera, you just point your camera at the QR code, a link will pop up, click it, and you're able to join. Or you can go to menti.com and you can put in the code 24673495. And then lastly, my colleague Carol has put the link in the chat as well. So you can select one of 3 options to join. If you're unable to join, I will also read aloud the questions and you can also share in the chat. But I see people are already responding. Yeah, look at where we can see where people are connecting from. So this is always really fun. This is something here at AFS we love to do all the time, just to have an idea where people are connecting from. So I'm seeing some strong representation from Europe. From North America, I see South America represented. I see Southeast Asia, India. Looks like Egypt, someone in Egypt there, and Central America, South America. Yeah, this is wonderful. Nigeria, I see a comment in the chats as well. Remember, if you're unable, if this doesn't work for you, please feel free to share in the chat as well. So if we just have someone from Australia or New Zealand pop in, we have every continent, but that's okay. Thailand, I see in the chat, lots and lots of different places. That's wonderful. We welcome everybody. Okay, next question. We'd like to learn from all of you in attendance. What is your field of work? Just so that the panelists can have an idea of our audience today. What is your background and what are you bringing to this webinar? There are a number of options: higher education faculty, administration, are you a researcher, student? Okay, so currently looks like we have strong representation from higher education faculty, higher education administration, researchers, non-formal education practitioners. We only have 1 K-12 teacher. Thank you for being here. Yes. Students, and then 3 others. If you feel like you would also be willing to share in the chat. If one of these categories doesn't fit for you and other, feel free to share in the chat your role and your field of work. I do see teacher also listed in the chat. So looks like maybe 3 teachers. All right, next question. What is your level of experience with global competence education? Our topic today, global competence education in teacher education. So you can rate your level of experience on a scale of 1 to 5, and we can kind of see the flow of data coming in, like, so it's kind of bulging in the middle there. Most people have self-reported that they're somewhere in the middle, like they're familiar with it, but maybe not considering themselves experts. Okay, all right. Well, that's good. That's good. Having some relevance, that definitely gives a frame of reference for what we're going to get into. So next, open-ended question. Please feel free to type out a short answer. What do you expect to get out of this webinar? So we have a couple an answer coming in already. Learn new things. Good. New tools and guidance, new resources for teacher training, motivation and knowledge, networking, inspiration. I like that. Inspiration multiple times. All right. Share new ideas, new resources, awareness, more sensitivity. I like that. Knowledge, hear best practices in the classroom, learn about new tools, enhance competencies, tools and methods you can bring to workplace for employee training and awareness. And I see something in the chat. Better pupils' approach to help them evaluate as their personalities. All of the ones mentioned. I like that. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for that. That allows us as the moderator and the panelists to kind of have a sense for who's with us here today. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First up, I'd like to introduce Sarah Louise Jones. Sarah is formerly the Director of Learning and Teaching for the School of Education at the University of Hull. Dr. Sarah Jones is now the Program Director for the Online Masters in Education program, and she supervises a range of PhD and educational doctoral students and leads 2 externally funded international research projects, one of which is focused on global competence in teacher education. She also has considerable experience and interest in working in rural communities in sub-Saharan Africa. Her main research interest is in shifting pedagogies, which can be disaggregated into 4 areas of focus, which are interlinked: global education, emerging technologies, translational research, and community engagement and participation. Her own PhD investigated the notion of pedagogic shift and transformational change in international education partnerships and collaborations. Internationally, Sarah is the Research and Development Council Chair on Global Education at the Association of Teacher Education in Europe. Well, welcome, Sarah. We're glad to have you with us. Next, I'd like to introduce Kirski Korkehaleto. Dr. Kirski Korkehaleto works as a senior lecturer at HAMK University of Applied Sciences in Finland. Her expertise includes language learning, e-learning, digitalization in education, and 21st century learning skills. Her focus is on creating engaging learning experiences with collaborative, authentic, and student-centered learning methods. She has been working on national and international projects regarding pedagogy, digital learning environments, and curriculum development in higher education. Thank you, Kirsi, for being here. Welcome. Our third panelist, Gorik van Helleputte. Gorik is a lecturer and an educational researcher at the University of Applied Sciences, UCLL, in Belgium. He is a nomad, K-N-O-W mad, and he is passionate with all things related to learning and agency. As a learning designer, his professional heartbeat is all about finding space, giving space, creating space to authentically learn and develop in the 21st century. He's been working on national and international projects in the field of pedagogy, curriculum development, world-centered education, global competence, and outdoor learning. Welcome, Gorik, and welcome to all 3 of our panelists here today. Before we get into just a quick rundown of the agenda, just wrapping up the introduction portion of the agenda, and then we'll pass off to Sarah, who will give us a background on what is the project, why it came together, who is in it, and how do these and how do those in the project define global competence. We'll then pass off to Kirski, who will talk about how tapping into teacher educators' expertise, how the project engaged teacher educators around the world in order to determine the push and pull factors that shape how global competence in teacher education is conceptualized today. We'll then pass over to Gorik, who will be talking about resources development, piloting, and final outputs of the project. We'll then return to Sarah, who will close out the formal part of the session and with discussion of further resources and what's coming next for the project. And then as much that time will allow, we will address any questions and discussion that come up as a result. And with that, without further ado, I will pass over to Dr. Sarah Louise Jones.
Thank you so much, Dylan. Can you hear me? Yeah, I'm good. Okay, thank you very much. Are you going to control the slides for me? And if so, can we get the next slide, please? Yeah, so, well, it's really lovely to have so many people here from around the world. I guess to start with, I wanted to say that this project hasn't come out of the blue. You know, this is my own personal story up here, but I'm sure if you ask any one of the panelists and the other project team, they will also be able to give you a rich history of their background and how it led to this moment where we created this project. Rather worryingly, when I look at this, I realize I've been working in this field for nearly 30 years, which makes me feel very old. And I just wanted to highlight two things that you might want to follow up and you might be interested to look at a later date. And the first one is the Eurolink Virtual International School, which is a collaboration of schools across Europe and North Africa, where people are working together to basically students are collaborating on student-led projects with a focus of intercultural understanding. So they're always looking for partners. So if you're interested, please do visit their website. So I've been involved with them since 2004 as a critical friend. And the other project I wanted to mention was the International Skills and Training Programme, because really, if it wasn't for that project, we wouldn't be doing the project we're doing now. And a key item that came out of that project is a global competence framework and survey that you can use with secondary school students as a way of them self-evaluating both their level of skill and the value they place upon those skills with regards to global competence. And I'll come back to that in a little while, because really it was because of that project, which was based in schools, secondary schools, that we got to the Global Competence and Teacher Education project, which we're going to talk about today. So if I could get the next slide, please. So first of all, let's have a look and see who we all are. Well, we're a range of partners from across the European Union. And also you'll see we've got AFS, which is unusual for a European funded project, but because of their specific expertise, we were able to argue that they joined with us into the project. And all of these partners, I selected them because they each in turn had some real experience and lived experience and expertise in the field of global competence and the related areas. So all of us come together with experience and with a long history of working in this field. You can see there's a link to our project website there. Next slide, please. And obviously there are names behind the institutions. This is a picture taken at one of our last project meetings in Leuven in June 2022. Next slide, please. So before we go any further, I always think it's worth just thinking back about how we arrived at where we are today. And one of the first things that we did as a project team, bearing in mind we all have different experiences, is we came together to have a look at what we actually meant by global competence. And I think if you look at the word cloud in the bottom right-hand corner, Many of you will perhaps have an interest in one or other of those terms. And there are a lot of similarities and overlaps, but there are also quite a few differences between them. And I don't know about you, but I've certainly been in situations before where I've had conversations with people only to realize halfway through that actually we're talking about something different, because we hadn't had time to actually concept check with each other about the terminology and what we understand by it. So as a project team, one of the first things we did was make a decision on what term we were going to use and what we understood by that term. And so we chose global competence as our term, and we used the OECD definition that was used in the PISA tests in 2018. And we did that recognizing that it's not without its criticisms, and there are plenty of debates both for and against that definition, but we couldn't progress the project without actually having that definition, and that's the one that we chose, irrespective of the debates and the critical views that exist around that. Next slide, please. And I also think that it's worth remembering the purpose that drove this particular project. So as I mentioned, the previous one, which was in secondary schools, where we developed the Global Competence Framework and Survey tool, we realized during that project that actually there's only so much we can do in schools without actually addressing teacher education as an entity. And that can be non-formal teacher education as well as formal teacher education. And Reimers put down a challenge around the fact that the teaching of global competence is problematic because there's a compartmentalization of the curricula, by which he means that people are in their subject silos and they fail to see the larger field. It's quite an old reference here, 2009, but actually even in more recent times, that view that we have a compartmentalization of the curricula still holds true. And there's also a lack of understanding, I think, about how we can engage certain activities within curricula to enhance and to promote the notion of global competence. So for those many reasons, we came up with the idea of the Global Competence and Teacher Education project. Running alongside that, and perhaps even underpinning that challenge, is an idea about why education, or why even our society, because obviously society and education are very closely linked, why it's changing so rapidly at the moment, and how it's so very different to the industrialized worlds that we used to live in pre-2000s and further back. And I did a piece of work a few years ago with a colleague in Australia called John Buchanan. And in the piece of work that we did, 4 themes emerged, which seemed to have a central play on how the notion of society and education is changing. And that was around globalization, the role of technology, global challenges, and changing identities. There's a lot more behind that, and you can read that in the paper that's referenced below. So I just want to put those 2 out there to give you some contextual information that foregrounds the work we did in the project. So if we could go to the next slide, please. And let's talk, because time is tight, let's go straight to what the project was about. Well, we had 5 different strands of work, or intellectual outputs as they're called. The first one, which took most of the first year of the project, was a scoping exercise and a curriculum mapping exercise, which was very much about finding out what was already out there, what was happening in the wider world, because why reinvent the wheel? And how can we harness the pockets of great practice that already exists? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the scoping exercise, and then Kirski will talk about the second one, which is about developing globally competent teacher educators. Gorik will talk about raising awareness of global competency, flexible training program. The third one there about raising awareness of global competency with school leaders. Very sadly, that wasn't funded, and it's still a mystery to us as a project team why that wasn't seen as important to the funders. So number 3 wasn't included, but it's work that we'd like to pick up in the future. Yeah, so Gorik will be talking about the flexible training program, and then there's a little note about the academic outputs, where you learn more about the theory that underpins our work. So the scoping exercise, there were 5 different strands of work within this. The first one that we engaged with was a systematic literature review, where we asked what was already happening in terms of teacher training, with regards to embedding global competence within teacher training programs around the world. We did policy review. We conducted a higher education review. There was a schools review and a non-formal review. And if we move to the next slide, you'll see that following on from those that scoping exercise and the curriculum mapping, we actually have 4 publications which you can access. 2 of those are academic papers, and 2 of those are book chapters, which are coming out in a book which is either going to be available at the end of December or sometime in January. We're not sure exactly of the release date yet. And there will be 2 other papers coming, and they will be accessible from the project website. So that will give you a very good understanding of all the work we did over the first year. And of course, the purpose of that was to make sure that we're all on the same hymn sheet, that we'd got all the available information in front of us, so that we could then go forward with the rest of the outputs in the confidence that we knew the field as well as we possibly could. And I think that's where my slides might come to an end. I'm just trying to remember what the last one was. Yeah, so I think I'm handing back over now.
Yes, well, thank you, Sarah. And yeah, great background into the project, what got us to this point, and all the factors involved with that. And with that, let's dive a little bit deeper into tapping into teacher educators' expertise. And Kirski.
Thank you, and thank you, Sarah, for telling us and reminding us what was our project about. And now I'm going to talk about the one part of the intellectual output 2, where the idea was, or the title was, to develop globally competent teacher educators. And of course, we had to first to raise the awareness of the teacher educators that they actually need to be globally competent, and the importance of that topic in teacher education programs. And we designed our output so that we would support the teacher educators to develop, first of all, their own global competence, and then somehow give them tools to facilitate their learning of trainee teachers' global competence. And in this output, we also co-created learning resources for teacher educators and started a teacher educators network. And this intellectual output started when actually COVID also started in Europe. And that was the reason why we decided to do it, or we had to do it totally online. And that also had some benefits, because then we could work globally, and we didn't have to organize these workshops anywhere in, for example, in Finland. That could have been, well, the learning process would have been a little bit different. But then we decided that, okay, now we are going to do this totally online. And before the actual start, we asked, tried to find teacher educators from all over the globe, and we sent them pre-assignment where they had to introduce themselves with a photo on a virtual platform called Padlet. You probably have heard about it. So it looked very interesting, because everybody introduced themselves to the rest of the group with the photos and telling something about themselves. And the idea was that they would get to know each other before we actually meet online. And we also wanted to map out their interest, and because the idea was to form thematic groups according to their interests and expertise. And then in January 21, we organized our first online workshop where we started the thematic group work. And between first online workshop and second online workshop, the teams worked online individually, and project partners were facilitating their work. And again, after second online workshop, we had a remote phase where they continued working with the thematic groups and created an artifact, which they presented then in our final webinar in April 21. So the whole, we called it a learning process for teacher educators, and the duration was half a year from January to April. Yes, and the idea of forming the thematic groups was to find common development targets, and which were aligned with the group theme. And then in these groups to empower individual to work individually and to collaboratively develop something that would have been beneficial for everybody who works in the field of teacher education. So they were able to define themselves, the groups, that what would be helpful for them as teacher educators. And then this was a very fruitful opportunity to work globally, to benchmark other teacher education programs all over the world, and then to find inspiration and collaboration within the thematic groups. And throughout this learning process, we had these online workshops where we gave peer feedback, and then the facilitators also gave their support during the remote phases as well. And of course, we wanted that they would form learning, somehow a learning environment and a collaboration that could continue even after this half a year which we worked together. And therefore we formed a Facebook group, and actually everybody is welcome to join our Facebook group still. We could actually find the link for that. Yes, please, Dylan, if you could change the slide. Our principles in working within the whole learning, this learning process, and also within the thematic groups was dialogical principles. You probably have heard about these dialogical principles, and that is actually what we use in all our teacher education programs. Dialogical principles are very, very, very important in our school. So the idea is that everybody's allowed to talk, everybody's allowed to speak their mind and even suggest some crazy ideas, and they should be discussed then within the group. And that was one principle that we wanted the teacher educators to also to grasp from our learning process, that they would use this later on in their own education and besides the global topics. And then we also made a little research about what was good in this learning process. And we are going to write an article about it, and the topic is an international learning process enhances teacher educators' professional development in global competence. And we have already some preliminary results, and they indicate that collaboration ownership of learning and purposefulness of co-created artifacts, as well as common target. They enhance teacher educators' professional development, whereas lack of resources and guidance, they challenge the professional development during the learning process. And that was a very, very common problem during this learning process, that teacher educators didn't have time or they didn't have resources. They wanted to collaborate and they wanted to create these artifacts together with the teacher educators from other countries, but the fact was that they didn't have enough time. But somehow they managed. Yes, as somebody says, time and resources are always a challenge in teachers' work. That's true. But Dylan, if you would like to show the next slide, because if you can click one of those, because those are, we made thing links about the artifacts that these thematic groups created, and these are always, we created these as thing links. So there's introduction to everybody who is there, who worked in the group, and then the actual result, what they created during this, was it 6 or 5 months? So these are the artifacts that are aimed for the teacher educators, and these are the groups, as how many groups we had and how many people were working in these thematic groups. But these are thing links, and in the previous slides, what were the thing links and the artifacts. So they are at our webpage for everybody to use and see what we created during this learning process. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsi. Very interesting to hear how you engage teachers into this process, or teacher educators into this process. And thank you for that background. And with that, we'll pass over to Gorik.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just going to time myself. I know my passion. Hello, everybody. Well, what I would like to do is take you along the story that we have in the creation of one of the intellectual outputs, being a flexible training program that we wanted to create and that we created, and of which the online book that will be presented today is part of the product. And it's something I did not take the lead in myself. We did it with a whole team, and together with Dima from UCLL, we actually took the lead in the development of this program. But this is not only my story, this is a team story, just to be clear about that. So next slide, please. Yeah, thanks a lot. When the project started, we really started with a beautiful ambition. And as Sarah already notified the whole idea of the project, I thought it's really important to highlight this ambition, because at the end, where did we come? Where did we land? As Sarah already said, well, when it comes to global competence, we all know it's not really effectively addressed within pre-service and initial teacher education. And when looking at teachers freshly coming from school, lots of them are totally unaware of global competence, or if aware and very competent in terms of curiosity, they're not always skilled in such a way that they can integrate it into their teaching. So that's how the project came alive. You know, we wanted to have globally competent teachers themselves, and them on their and them themselves being able to develop global competence with their students, their pupils. So that's kind of the ambition. The vision we had is we want to do something, but the mission was, one of the missions was that we wanted something that could really help teachers and teacher trainers. So we said we're going to create this flexible training program, and the end product was, at the end, it landed in the concept of the online book. And one of the most interesting things we wanted to have in the online book is that it's not an ending point, but it's a beginning point. So I hope that bringing you through the story of how we created, you see this really as a starting point, and we hope you're inspired to move on and use it as your next step. So the idea was, with the book, just one step back, Dylan, please. Okay, so one major thing we wanted to highlight, that it was not only framing and aiming for formal education, but the collaboration with AFS was also trying to include people from non-formal, because that's those people who are within the global competence frame when it comes to teaching. Okay. Yeah. I'm struggling here. Okay. So one thing Sarah also mentioned, but I think is really important, is that when you start looking around and what can we create and what can we do, is that we did not want to reinvent the wheel. So I would really consider, if you're interested in models and so on, to have a look at the systematic literature review we did, because there is there's a beautiful list of frameworks, models and tools and practices that have been selected out of the thousands. So a starting point is, if you want to continue yourself, that's a really interesting starting point. That's also what we use to kind of get into the mood and see what's out there and what we could build on. So in the plan and the design of a flexible training program, this was one of our building blocks. Next. Yeah. Next, one very important thing is, when you start a project and you want to end with something you value very much, is you need to find a common language. And one of the common languages was content-wise, that is, let's use the word global competence, again, as Sarah noted already, and we used the OECD definition. And that's actually what we kept as a heartbeat going through the process of development of the online book. What are we talking about? Well, this is how we see our global competence. But on the other hand, we were also looking for a kind of an instrument that would give us common language in understanding how we organize our thoughts when talking about global competence. And then we bumped into the Global Competent Learning Continuum, the GCLC, that was developed by the Association of Supervision and Curriculum Development, the ASCD. Going through all models that are on the net and in the literature, this was a very interesting one, because it was actually very structured, but it was also aiming at teachers and teacher training. So it was a really interesting framework for us. It was actually, it gave us the opportunity to know what we're talking about, but also frame our thoughts. In the next slide, well, in the next slide, on the right-hand side, you can see actually the continuum. That's what we put in there. So what is actually that continuum talking about? What is it actually as an instrument? Well, it's no more than actually just a comprehensive list of, as you can read over there, characteristics of globally competent teachers, but yet beautifully categorized in 3 parts, with each on its different elements, that when we talk about global competence in teacher education, we kind of have a structure that is, we're talking about teacher disposition, we're talking about certain knowledge that we need as a teacher, and certain skills that we need as a teacher. And diving into the model, you can then go more specifically. So that is the what of the global, the GCLC, the continuum. It is actually, if you go into the model itself, it's also beautiful in the way that they present the model, since it's actually the idea that it accommodates for those who are really high level global competent, or those that are very nascent and just in the beginning of learning what global competence is all about. So to us, that was really a nice starting point. And we used this in the first step of our own process of working towards a product. So what we did is we actually started with the development of 12 lessons learning designs for each of these topics separately. The idea was that we would like to provide something that is actually all over the continuum of global competence, offering at least one learning material. So what we did is all of us were divided in COIL groups. And what is a COIL? A COIL stands for Collaborative Online International Learning. So what we did is actually it's connecting, but the beauty is that it's not only teachers or students connecting, but it's teachers connecting with teachers and students with students. And then in a cohort of a group of people, you start exchanging online. So that was a nice concept. So the next slide, please. Well, so that brought us to the concept of 2 COILs, in which COIL 1 on the left-hand side, you could see was allocated half of the learning designs, half of the topics, which lead to half of the learning designs to be created. And this COIL was a joint venture between Hull, Hellenic Open University, AFS, and they had 4 testing sessions between this time last year, between November and December. And on the other hand, we had the COIL 2, and they did something similar. And what they did was exchanging real online learning moments designed by themselves and tested by themselves. So actually what this did was, based on the curriculum, the continuum, the continuum, we had all these learning programs, learning designs. We created them ourselves, and then we went online in an international context, but not only international, it was also collaboration between formal and non-formal. There were students involved and there were professors involved. So it was a kind of a beautiful blend. It was all cultures all around the world. So we did all this piloting. Yes, they are available online. It's coming. So this was at the pilot phase. This was the implementation, the delivery of the first initial created lessons. And what we also liked is that the people that came together to create these learning designs were in one way or another experts. So the joint venture of all this expertise together and the space to share was really valuable. So the next step, Dylan, the next step was, okay, after the COILs, after several lessons had been shared and created online and for a certain moment in time, we wanted feedback, because the whole idea is we wanted to have an end product that other people could use. So the feedback was based on 2 ways of getting feedback. First of all, we did a quantitative questionnaire from the participants. And what was really beautiful to hear from the people was that when it comes to the concept of the COIL and the piloting of what they did, they said it was very beautiful to see how the concept of active listening was promoted. Lots of people felt very honored to be part of a global society with like-minded people all around the world. And well, as you can see, the words over there were things that really came alive. And I only took out those that really came explicitly alive out of most of the people. Students felt very motivated and so on. When we go back and listen to the people who were facilitating the COILs online, one thing that was unanimous was that it was well received. The whole idea of the concept was very well received. But there's always some buts. practical buts in the sense that there was a necessity of the streamlining because several designs did not complement very well. It was not always so guided, and it was sometimes a little chaotic in getting in line with each other. So the needs expressed, as you can see there, were the things that we took into account. And what we did was, with all the feedback from the participants and the facilitators, we asked the people who created the initial learning designs to make a version 2.0. But in helping to get all the needs structured, we were looking for something that was going to help us. And what we found was a really interesting tool or a vehicle to get things done. It was the learning designer. I'll come to that very directly. But the learning designer, and also here, are we talking about lessons or designs? Well, the word learning design felt as the most globally competent way of looking at offering learning activities. It offers a uniform structure. It was very visually. The learning tool is also very able to be culture sensitive, and it's 100% focused on hybrid and flexible online learning. And as you can read here, the tool is called the Learning Designer tool. It's totally free and open source, and it's also based on the concept of the conversational framework. On the right-hand side, you can see an image of that. And it's actually taking into account very different types of learning that make up the whole learning process of students and teacher trainers. So that was the instrument we used. And then all the learning designs were re-edited and were designed now with this instrument. And what we did afterwards is, when all the learning designs were edited and refined, we held a test case moment. We had a learning, teaching, training event in Belgium. It was 4 days of sharing, and people from all over the world came to Leuven, from the USA, Africa, South America, Europe, Asia. It was also a beautiful mix of formal and non-formal, and teachers, trainees, student teachers. So it was a kind of a 4-day boot camp trying out all these learning experiences, learning designs. And this was actually the second pilot moment. And what we did here was, again, based on the feedback from this international group from people, but who were now committed full-time for the 4 days to engage in our lessons, our learning designs. Again, we re-edited all the learning designs, and this brought us to the concept of now 12 learning designs. That's what you can see on the right-hand side. These 12 learning designs are not considered as just a copy-paste for yourself, but they're actually all hyperlinked within the online book that will be shared. And the idea is, you have a starting point, you have an example, but as I told, it's like a DJ who can shift with all the knobs. You can do more of that, less of that. You can put more in of that. So it's very adjustable. So you can add what is needed to it to fit your own context. And I think this is a very inspirational way of presenting the learning materials we created throughout the last, well, 1.5 years. And I felt honored to be part of this story. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gorik. Wow, something that's coming through to me is that just about each section so far that we've heard could be its own webinar. Definitely need more time to dig through all the amazing resources shared there. I hate to rush you, Sarah, but just with an eye on the clock, we don't have too much time, so I'll let you get right into this wrap-up section.
Sure, thanks. And before I start this next slides, I'd just like to publicly say what a fantastic team I've had around me You know, everybody has worked so hard on this, and you know, they are such a skilled group of people, not just Gorik and Kirski, who you see here, but that there's been a whole raft of people that we've worked so well together as a team to produce this. So well done everybody for all your hard work. Yeah, I've just seen the note about the World Council on Intercultural and Global Competence. I have spoken to Darla about our work. She is aware of what we've done, so we are in conversation. Yeah, next slide, please. So obviously, this is about what we're doing now, and we've already mentioned that it was a bit of a sadness to us that we didn't get funded to raise awareness with school leaders, and there hasn't been time to do this in the project, but we do hope that we will have time in some follow-on activities. But what we're currently doing at the moment is another piece of work which was funded for the project, but we didn't have time to do because of COVID. So we're just managing to cram it in at the end, and that's about using 360-degree videos. We're currently running a small pilot, so we've got 4 360-degree videos that we've taken of the insides of different schools around the world. If you go to the next slide, please. The idea behind this is that they'll be interactive, so that you'll be able to, as somebody viewing this 360-degree video, you'll be able to hone in on a particular area of the video. And here you can see, for example, in this particular classroom, you could hone in and you could see what the values are for that school, and you could learn more about it. Or if you go to the next slide, you could see some of the pledges and learn what it means to have a Black History Month pledge and what goes behind that, and what does the pledge actually mean. So these are different things that we found specific to certain classrooms in certain parts of the world. And what we're going to do with these videos is actually get some feedback from users to see how they would be useful and where they need to be developed. And last but not least, if you're interested in getting involved with any of the work that we've talked about, please do join the Global Education Network here on LinkedIn. There's probably an awful lot more we could say, but time is against us. So I'll hand back for any questions if there is time.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you to all of our panelists. Very informative. And again, just, yeah, we are pressured by time here. It definitely feels like we could go much further in depth. I do see kind of a consistent, a couple of people have mentioned how can they connect with you further if with further questions, and perhaps we'll get to that coming up. But I'd like to start us off this questions and discussion period. We have about 10 minutes for this. I'd like to hear a little bit about the usability or the applicability of the framework of the eBook, the learning designs in the various contexts around the world. For example, I'm thinking of my experience teaching in Mozambique compared to Washington, D.C. And Mozambique, I had a classroom of 70 plus students, very little resources, and just whether, how can teacher educators, anticipating the reality of their teachers that they are educating in different contexts, different nations around the world. Yeah, how usable is it, right? Like, if anybody would speak to that aspect of this output, just the different realities facing different classrooms around the world, not just Europe, North America, but everywhere in the world.
So, I mean, I'll jump in first, but please, Kirski and Gorik, do come in. I mean, we have tried very hard throughout this process of developing the materials and the actual process, which is perhaps to some degree more important than the actual materials themselves, to involve people from a variety of different global contexts. And different countries from around the world. And the idea behind what we've created is at their core, they're meant to be flexible. They're guidelines of processes as well as content themselves. So they are adaptable. Of course, a bigger question comes when we look at the 360-degree videos and how inclusive is that kind of technology to certain cohorts, certain countries. but that's a very brief answer, unless Gorik or Kirsi would like to come in.
Looks like Gorik has something.
I was struggling to unmute. Something perhaps in terms of usability and using this kind of materials in different contexts. I would like to connect to what Sarah said in the beginning. Sometimes you're talking with somebody, and 10 minutes down the line, you all of a sudden have the idea that we're not talking the same language. So I think one of the beautiful starting points of what we created here is that you start with a common language. You know, it's like we as teachers, we always deal with our eyes, and we move on with what we see. But one of the things is, for instance, the OECD as a common way of looking at what we are talking about, and the continuum that is offering a structure. So when you're in the process of constructing something, you kind of can bend on this structure so that this works fluently. And I think that's the grounding thing that you need if you want to move on with people, that there is a sense of decent understanding. That's one. Well, and that's actually the main thing that I think that is important. And then you have the technical element, and that is within the Learning Designer tool. You can adjust, you can make something live or online, or you can put other tools in, but you have a good starting point that you can adjust. But the adjustments made and the ones you choose, those are based on the idea, do we understand each other well enough? And even within our project, there was time needed to find the frequency in terms of what are we talking about. And I think every time you meet with people in the concept of this concept, there's always a little time needed to adjust and understand each other. So in terms of adjustability, I think starting with a common language is a very interesting element to quickly move on.
Love it. Yeah. No, wonderful. Exactly. The adaptability of all of this just seems, great. Very applicable in many different settings. We have a question regarding assessment from Linda. Would love to hear more about the appropriate methods of inquiry to assess student global competence development, which I think was Learning Design 12. What did you land on? And then what exactly are you assessing is the question. Should I repeat that? So a question about assessment.
I'm just trying to find the learning design because there are quite a few. So I'll just go back to see if I can find it while you're chatting. Yeah.
Sure, no problem. So Learning Design 12, appropriate methods of assessing or using inquiry to assess student global competence development. Yeah, what you landed on, and then what exactly are you assessing or is being assessed through that learning design? I was present during the webinar yesterday, which was a whole webinar based on assessment of global competence. So I'm assuming there are a lot of folks interested in assessing global competence, and I know that that's a debated topic with much of a lot of different opinions surrounding that.
So
yeah.
Go ahead,
Yes,
Kirsi.
if I may say, for us, the whole teacher education program is pass and fail. That is how we assess our teacher education programs, and for us in Finland, it is more important that the teacher education students, they are able to reflect their own knowledge and their own skills. So our focus is on that rather than assessing from 0 to 5 or something like that.
Yes, and that Learning Design 12, I've just had a quick look. That's the nub of what that learning design is about. It's about reflection and reflexivity within that.
Great. Gorik, it looks like you're contemplating jumping in there.
I think this, oh, sorry, Sarah.
Go ahead.
No, I think this learning design is not about having an answer straight on what is the assessment strategy. It's about how to think about assessment and to get moving on in terms of how do you organize yourself? How do you, so it's focusing on the process of thinking about assessment rather than a product for assessment. That's what I actually wanted to say.
Yes, and I think if we also think about what global competence is about, you know, how do you assess somebody's view on their beliefs, or how do you assess somebody's values? Some of this really is about reflexivity rather than assessment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I would agree. And exactly, it seems like it kind of goes back to the adaptability part. Like this is just interchangeable in terms of meeting the reality of each teacher educator of each location. So assessment can be modified in that context, right? Like what exactly is being considered.
And one also, you know, I mean, we could spend quite a long time talking about assessment, but assessment for whom and why? What's the purpose of it? And actually what I found in my previous project is that actually the value of the assessment, if that's what we're going to call it, is that it's owned and directed and honestly portrayed by those who are engaged in the learning. So actually students take part in a self-reflective tool. And actually more value comes from that, because the response that they get is actually goes back to them themselves, and it's there for them to reflect on and to think, well, based on what I've discovered about myself, where do I want to go to next? How do I want to improve or change or whatever it might be?
Mm-hmm. I see a comment in the chat from Carol. We had a webinar on it, exactly the webinar that I spoke about yesterday. It is recorded, so if anybody is interested on learning more about the assessment of intercultural competence, we do recommend watching that recording as well. I think, unfortunately, there's only about 5 more minutes. There's a couple things to mention before we close, so I think we will unfortunately have to wrap up the Q&A portion, but we will again be sharing this recording and associated resources with this project. And so we encourage everybody that if your question has not been answered, or if you think of another question, to reach out to the participants. Looks like Gorik has shared his contact in the chat, and then I'll confer with the other panelists if they would like to share their contact as well in the future. So just to wrap up this webinar, a couple of things to mention. Early on in the presentation, I mentioned that I'm the coordinator for the Effect Plus for the Classroom program. We do want to mention that this is a program available for free. It is a capacity building program for secondary school teachers anywhere in the world. We have 300 scholarships available for anybody that is a secondary school teacher. This program, again, is a capacity building, aiming to equip teachers with the ability to bring global competence into their classroom. We provide teaching resources that includes an educator toolkit that has specific lesson plans laid out for you. It's hoping to guide the teacher in that process. You'll also be enrolled into a global virtual community with teachers from everywhere that are joining the program and collaborating over that platform. To learn more, please go to the website listed here, and my colleague Carol has shared that in the chat, as well as I see Kirsi and Sarah have shared their contacts as well in the chat, should you want to chat with them more. So again, Effect Plus for the Classroom. If you are a secondary school teacher, or if you know secondary school teachers, please consider sharing this resource to them. It's a great opportunity. With that in mind, well, with all that said, we've learned a lot today, a short amount of time. It does feel like each section could have been its own webinar. I want to thank each of our panelists, Sarah, Gorik, and Kirsi. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you everybody for being here. Before you leave, we'd love to hear feedback from you. Again, there's a QR code here. There's also a link put in the chat right now. We'd love your feedback, what you thought of the session, what could be improved. And thank you all so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, everyone.